One of the criticisms raised by opponents of the Quran is that the stories in this book bear a strong resemblance to ancient myths and legends, and that this similarity indicates these stories were copied and retold from those myths. In this section, we will briefly examine this question and offer a response consistent with the Quranic verses. A significant portion of the Quran consists of the stories of the prophets and past nations, stories that are sometimes repeated multiple times in this book and approached from different angles. This criticism has been raised since the very era of the Quran's revelation. The Quran itself refers 9 times to this objection, noting that when opponents heard the verses of this book, they would declare, "These are nothing but the tales of the ancients," meaning the myths and stories of former peoples. This shows that from the very beginning, a resemblance was perceived between the Quranic stories and the myths popular among the people, and the accusation of copying was already being made. To clarify the matter, it is best to look at 2 specific examples. The first is the story of Noah and the flood. This story shares many features with ancient myths, myths in which a flood occurs due to conflicts among the gods, and chosen individuals are informed of the event by certain gods, board a ship, and are saved. Tablets discovered through archaeological excavations also show that a flood story of this kind existed in ancient legends thousands of years ago. This very fact gave rise to the accusation that the Quran retold these same stories as divine revelation, drawing on myths that had found their way into the Torah. The second example is the story of Dhul-Qarnayn. Some believe this story is taken from narratives about Alexander the Great. Some research further shows that those narratives about Alexander were themselves based on a forged account, a historian who lived 200 years after the birth of Christ, while Alexander lived 300 years before Christ, attributed fabricated stories to Alexander containing bizarre details such as his journey to the end of the world and the building of a barrier against Gog and Magog. Critics argue that the Quran relied on these forged stories and retold them under the name of Dhul-Qarnayn. In response to these criticisms, Muslim commentators and scholars maintain that similarity does not necessarily mean adaptation or copying. It is quite possible that many of these stories and myths had authentic roots and a revelatory dimension, being historical realities that gradually became distorted, mixed with superstitions, and spread among the people, and that the Quran then represented the correct and accurate version of these realities. As for the story of Dhul-Qarnayn, more precise research shows that the situation is actually the reverse. The Dhul-Qarnayn spoken of in the Quran lived hundreds of years before Alexander, and certain people sought to attribute to Alexander characteristics and stories whose true origin belonged to the real Dhul-Qarnayn. These responses largely dispel the existing ambiguity and suggest that the likelihood of such borrowing is either non-existent or extremely weak. Nevertheless, it seems that an approach beyond these responses should also be considered. Even if we assume that some Quranic stories have a mythical dimension, meaning they are drawn from stories popular among the people, and that the Quran presented its teachings within the framework of those stories, this still raises no objection against the Quran. The Quran has not presented itself as a book of history. It has presented itself as a book of guidance, morality, and exhortation. Using stories popular among the people to convey lessons and wisdom is not only unobjectionable, it is one of the most effective methods of teaching and guidance, and no one considers such stories to be false or invalid. Accordingly, the Quran's repeated emphasis that it is a book of truth, containing nothing but truth, does not mean this book cannot make use of symbolic stories or mythical expressions. Using this narrative style in no way contradicts the Quran's truthfulness, its guidance, or its divine nature. The most telling evidence in support of this approach is the Quran itself. Although the Quran repeatedly quotes its opponent's objections about the mythical nature of its stories, it nowhere offers a direct response and simply passes over the matter. The only place where a response can be inferred is Surah An-Nahl, where the Quran contrasts two perspectives: those who dismissively say, "Tales of the ancients," and the God-fearing who say with reflection and fairness, "Good," meaning this is something sound and true. The message of this contrast is clear. A book of guidance is to be judged by its content and its fruits, not by its form of expression or narrative framework. This shows that the Quran itself does not insist on defending the historicity of its stories. What matters to it is the message and guidance these stories carry. In conclusion, it must be emphasized that if someone argues that because the Quran repeatedly calls itself a book of truth and insists on the truthfulness of its content, it therefore cannot make use of symbolic stories or mythical expressions, this argument does not hold. The validity of a book of guidance rests on the truth of its message and teachings, not on the form of expression or the framework used to convey that message. The use of symbolic or mythical stories, therefore, in no way contradicts the Quran's truthfulness, its guidance, or its divine nature. And this book remains fully acceptable as a reliable source of guidance for humanity.